Can't believe I'm saying this in 2021, but the Earth Legendaries are probably the weakest of the bunch of Legendaries we have so far. And that's kind of a shock to me because I've always felt like the Earth Legendaries are pretty strong. But let's talk about why, shall we? Enjoy the video.
Let the lesson begin.
What's up guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Emblem Heroes video. Today's video is the Earth Legendaries ranked. We have covered the wind and the water. No, not the water, the fire. Wind and fire, water is next, guys. So if you haven't watched those, and those are a couple days ago, the link will be above me, and just go check out the channel and follow a few days back just to get full perspective on these legendaries. Next up will be water, and as we get new legendaries and updates to older legendaries such as weapon refines and skill refines, I will likely post my thoughts either in a video when that legendary gets released or on Twitter, so make sure you follow all of that and you'll get full perspective there. Before we begin, if you enjoy this content and you want to see more of it, give it a thumbs up, sub if you haven't already, go check out my social media in the description below, such as Instagram, where you'll find stuff like that in my background there, and more real stuff, and Patreon if you want to support this content. Plus I'm going to be doing some Patreon engagement that will come back looping into these videos from your feedback, so thank you guys. Alright, today's video is the Earth Legendaries, and as with the previous ranking of videos, or legendary rankings, I'm going to talk about the best ones and why it might be a good idea to invest in them, and of course dismiss the ones that are not worth investing into, and exactly why they aren't worth the investment. Of course, if you don't agree or I might have missed something, just let me know in the comments below and I'll likely read your comment and acknowledge it. For example, I think in the previous video with Sonia, I incorrectly said it was a Hell outfit, it's a Moonspell outfit. So yeah, I'm not perfect, but I do miss some details here and there, though I feel pretty confident about my list, and of course, at the end of the day, it's just my opinion. So let's jump into it, shall we? Here is my list going forward. If you don't know how I kind of like rank through this, that is right below me here. So that's like my criteria for how I go about recording, like ranking these. However, you're gonna see a little bit of like out of this list, maybe if you're like you haven't used these legendaries or you don't understand what's going on here, I'll explain. So we seem to be keeping the tradition here that like there's like one really good legendary in the S tier and then everyone else is like in the A and B tiers, and probably to no one's surprise, Claude is up there, just like Lilina and Sigurd from the other respective legendary seasons that I've covered. Now, the interesting thing here to talk about is, like, I'll go through all this and I'll give you builds and, of course, refresh your memory on skills and such, but Claude is basically fitting all of the criteria below me. So he has, like, high scoring, the highest scoring of Earth. He's really good at his combat. He's got a really good weapon that's unique to flyers. He has an amazing beat preference skill. And I'll talk about this in more detail. But he basically checks all the marks here, which makes him the perfect Earth Legendary to invest in if you don't have one already. Then it gets a little bit trickier in how I think this is like one of the harder lists for me to like make, because things get really complicated here. Some of these legendaries fit some criteria and some of them don't. So I've actually started at the bottom here and worked my way up. Now Tiki actually scores pretty well, in fact better than like Alm and like most of these actually. Like she's basically third place, but like equal to Julia and right behind Claude. Or sorry, I guess Seliph is also scoring better than all of them. But yeah, she's basically tied for third place. But the problem is she sucks at everything else. Like, as an avid plus 10 Tiki user, let me be the first to tell you that the arena experience using Tiki is not very fun. So the problem with scoring well in like arena is it doesn't matter if you score well if you can't actually play the game. And this is the problem with Tiki. You're gonna get literally zero utility out of AR offense, AR defense. She cannot really do her job at all, if anything, and it doesn't really matter what build you do, because you can't run stuff like, let's say, Blue Flame. You can run Blue Flame, you can't run Ruptured Sky, you can't really counter Claude, you can't really do anything against most other competition she has. She's basically a score bot, and to the limitations of what she is, that unfortunately doesn't mean you can throw her on your team and then win at arena, because you still got to play the game. So this is a very harsh example, but Tiki only has one thing going for her, and unfortunately that's really bad. Now I'm still going to work my way up here and we'll get back to Julia, but Next up would be someone like Grima. So unfortunately, I actually feel like Grima would be an easy like S or second place Earth Legendary here, but she got screwed. Like, she straight up got screwed that her A skill was not given a dual skill scoring. She like basically wasn't brought up to modern standards of scoring, and that is a big problem. So it's kind of the opposite effect of Tiki here. So really good in basically everything else for the most part. Being a flyer is also good because you can provide guidance. She's immune to flyer effectiveness. Her upgrades gave her basically 8 to all stats. She has guard. She's colorless. Really good unit, like overall, and usable in AR on offense to basically be a full carry during Earth seasons. So you would think she's way better than this, and she is, but because she scores so low, you're essentially forced to bring in stuff like Flame Emperor or Benny or Winter Hilda, and therefore, like, assuming you're F2P and limited resources and, you know, trying to just score as much as you can, you're forced into these like really high scoring units to make up for the fact that Grima herself doesn't score well. And that just ends up being like frustrating because you'd have to do more arena fishing, you just can't rank as well. So it kind of sucks in that aspect. Of course, if you use like really good duo heroes that are plus 10, you kind of can skip all this nonsense and just use Grima, but that's not really applicable to most players, I would say, and therefore I cannot put Grima higher than this because she just has the opposite effect of what Tiki has. Maybe C dual infantry for flyer, C dual flying helps here, but honestly, removing her preference skill does make her a lot worse. So sorry, Grima fans. Next up is Ike here. And Ike got some pretty solid buffs, and I don't actually think he's too bad, but he does kind of feel dated. And what I mean by this is like, you basically got like Radiant Ether, and that's like pre-charged, and you got your Ragnar, which is like refined now, and he's kind of caught up in that respect, and he uses our dual infantry 4 pretty well, but he's limited in scoring, he's a melee unit, and for the most part he's pretty limited in utility by just being straight up like a combat unit. So he's not bad as an individual unit, but he doesn't really do much. At least he scores better than Grima, and he's generally like running some pretty potentially powerful things. So he's just like barely on the cusp of being really good, but unfortunately that's like the most they'll do here. Finally, Julia, Alm, and Seliph, solid in the middle here, and that's just a combination of being usable in most modes. You could use Seliph as a carry, you can use Alm in air defense, Julia in air defense. You can use them in air offense, potentially as PvE cleanup units or just nukers and such. They score pretty well, like decently. Alm's a little bit starting to get a bit dated, but he's colorless, he has good matchups, and he fits into the meta pretty well, being a potential user of Deadeye or sticking with Lunar Flash if he wanted to. So yeah, solid in the middle there. But that's basically Earth, and this is definitely more complicated than the other seasons, which may have been like far more clear, and I definitely wanted to, you know, go over that as much as I could for you guys. But let's go into more detail of the best investments here, which I would consider the S and A. Don't go with B. I sincerely hope Tiki like ends up being amazing, but I couldn't see what they could do to Blue Dragon armor with one movement and a buff. Like, she just has a buff right now. Like, there's gonna be some crazy shenanigans that intelligence systems would have to do just to get her up to speed. All right, so we'll start with Claude here and why exactly he's so good. I don't think anyone will really argue with this one, but he fits into the meta really well. Colorless, scores really well, can use Deadeye, has gravity, which is now really good in a safe defense meta where you can basically do a lot of hit and run shenanigans, and Claude lends himself really well to that. For basically air offense, he's not a slouch in air defense either. His stat spread is modern. He's going to be by far the best Earth Legendary you can invest into. I don't know if I would rank him like anywhere close to like Legendary Sigurd, for example. I think he might be better than Legendary Lilina comparatively speaking, but we're not comparing through different seasons because generally speaking you'll run into like the same batch among themselves. Like basically Earth Legendaries will usually fight the Earth Legendaries, fire the fire, and so forth, right? So modern stat spread, really solid preference skill which has gravity and that damage reduction, which is just like unnecessarily good for him. So you won't be disappointed with someone like Claude. Now as a one-off, as I said, he lends himself really well to the hidden run strategy, which I think is very powerful now in AR offense. So you could run something like this, basically rely on Fallen Star, his good stat spread, his base kit works fine, and then use a seal, potentially like aerobatics or flyer formation, to get out. Basically hit and run. And if you set this up properly, you can have a dancer, either flyer or what doesn't matter, infantry, whatever, and he can get a 3 movement jump because of flyer formation aerobatics and reposition. Like you can really set up some good things here, potentially with the right movement skill, if you ask me. Again, it depends. Like maybe you want to run flyer guidance, for example. That's also potentially good. There's a lot of cool things you could do here for either setting up or moving back, and I feel like Flyer's biggest weakness is 2 movement, so you can get around that with seals that are enabling of that mobility for easier snipes or getting out. Again, he can work on defense as well, and I'm not even going to really talk about that too much, but a Claude on defense is a solid Claude. Finally, if you go all in for the +10, there's not much really to say here. You just want to run high scoring skills. Ruptured Sky lends really well to anti-beasts, anti-dragons, and if he's like doing already well in combat, then just provide him some sort of support with guidance, and that'll help your team even further. But honestly, I'm not going to spend too much time on Claude because I don't think there really is more convincing needed if you're watching this on why Claude is good. Let's talk more about Julia and why I think she's actually a second place contender here. Now, I feel like Julia and Alm are actually about equal when it comes to the Earth Legendaries in terms of ranking. In fact, I might put Alm a little bit higher in some cases, but generally speaking, Julia is about second place because of her higher scoring, which is 180, and Alm's being 175. So in terms of longevity, I feel like Julia will last a bit longer than Alm, despite probably having a weaker place in the meta. She's not a slouch though, and that's definitely what we're going to talk about here. And the thing is, her attack stat is huge, like super huge. And I'm talking because she has her Omega Lull in the B skill, and she has a really good attack stat, still very modern by today's standards, and her preference weapon usually gives her an additional 6 attack on top of that. So she can work really well as like an anti-mage or just a big solid nuke, which is exactly where I would kind of think about using her on air defense, and I'm glad I don't see this as often. You can run like a AoE special if you can pre-charge this with Times Pulse and Infantry Pulse potentially, or you can run Dragon Fang and just really get some value, or even Draconic Aura, out of her Virtuous Naga. Omega Lull shuts down enemies' buffs and such. So as a big nuker, she hits some really high attack stats that are much welcome as a potential defense unit if you need to fill out that blue slot. And I don't feel like there's too many big blue nukers besides the obvious Reinhardt here and Ophelia, who's a more dated, but generally speaking, Julia does get some nice benefits through her Omega Lull and her Dragon Effectiveness, which I think are undervalued, especially if dragons become more prominent in the meta, which, to be honest, is possible considering we have Windsweep as pretty common now, and stuff like Noe and Dragon Wall are actually pretty good as potential like carries. So if you start seeing that, then stuff like Julia and Thrasier should make a return into the meta. But yeah, if you do commit like harder into Julia, then here's a unique or different type of builds that I feel you could consider for Julia, which is honestly just rounding out her bulk and then using her on dual phase. Remember that dragons are melee units, and I feel like Julia can run a close counter build pretty well to be able to just basically kill those. You could actually run Mystic Boost here as well as an option instead of attack defense form, and then just don't run like a defense IV and just force dragons to hit her res. But I feel like rounding out her matchups into other melee units is not a solid choice at all. For example, like Ike or something. I mean, Ike is probably not the best example, but you can definitely like round out her matchups really well by just focusing on her bulk. Her Omega Lull lends well to that. You can run like the brand new attack defense form, and if you have some defense support, ally support and such, you're gonna hit like 40 defense pretty easily. Res will be like in the 50s because of Virtuous Naga and such. So I think this is a solid way to consider using Julia. Give her dual phase. Her player phase is no slouch, and there's a lot of dragons that you'll run into where this would be pretty useful. Just one way to think about it. I mean, the traditional like nuke, build with like mirror impact or whatever, and then using a Mystic Boost seal if you take retaliation from dragons is not bad either, but I do like this as an option. You don't. Correction. You don't need Mystic Boost because the Omega Lull disables that sort of thing. So again, just correcting all that. I'm gonna leave this unedited because it's more natural that way. Anyways, you don't need Mystic Boost, but the B skill does it. Let's move on. Alm. Now, Alm, as I said, is about even to Julia, and the thing that I feel lacking here is his scoring. So he's basically the worst tied with Ike here, and at least he beats Grima, but he shouldn't beat Grima. That's the thing. He shouldn't because Grima should have been updated. He should have been equal to it. Alm's stat spread is still pretty good. 37-37. Offense is no slouch. Colorless is good. Archers are good. I don't really need to say more. His preference skill and his preference weapon are still very relevant, and I feel they'll forever be relevant because he just has like true damage. And this was my point with Celica. It's always good to have true damage because you'll always do damage. There's no such thing as zero damage for Alm and Celica. And that's really good to have. And for someone who's colorless, that's even better because you can win against a very high broad range of matchups. He's also like the first pair up Earth Legendary, which means he will likely get updated sooner than the other ones, and that potentially can put him really in a good spot. I don't know what they do with like Lunar Flash, but Luna Arc is a good weapon, and should definitely, like, if you like Alm, like he's not bad at all to consider. Now on defense, he's always been pretty annoying to deal with, and combining like sturdy impact and null follow-up is going to create a lot of these like speed checks for against enemy like null follow-up users, or just shut down a lot of pesky stuff that might have like auto doubles. You might run into like let's say a Vector who's running Crafty Fighter, for example, and he's got like a double QR effect, and null follow-up's just like, no, I don't care about that. So that's why I think that's pretty solid. I've run into quite a few of these kind of variants Alm, and they're really hard to kill and deal with. Remember, he does true damage. So even if Vector has 10,000 defense, it doesn't matter. Actually, he'd probably end up killing, I think, based off that. But anyways, the true damage ends up being very useful, and he ends up being a fairly solid staple to a defense team because of that. The only thing you'd really want to like take into account here is him surviving retaliations or surviving one-shots, which something like Sturdy Impact or Sturdy Blow do well. To keep in mind, you could honestly run plus speed here instead of plus attack, because for null follow-up checks and such, that's not a bad idea. Finally, in Arena, just like I mentioned with Julia, a close counter build could work pretty well. He's not locked into a 300 SPC skill like Julia is, so you can actually run Times Pulse and then run either Deadeye or his Lunar Flash, whatever you prefer here. But he has a slightly different purpose than what I would compare to like Julia. Julia just wants to like have even matchups and counter dragons really well, which should work in most Arena design. With Alm, on the other hand, you can try to focus your attention on killing stuff like Claude through his damage reduction, or killing like Legendary Sigurd if you have Earth-Wind overlap. There's plenty of other damage reduction units in the game as well, especially lately, either running Repel, Spurn, or just built into their weapons or skills or whatever. So just running like Deadeye, Close Counter, for example, gives him some solid mixed options here. He's not going to be as tanky as Julia because he doesn't have the Omega Lull, but the null follow-up close counter combo is a solid thing to consider. Again, you could always just run traditional player phase only kind of stuff, but I feel like for Arena, being able to multi-phase or enemy phase or player phase is what makes the better units in general. Unless you can run, in which case, if you have like a dancer like Peony or Mira or Ninja Lin, then you can just focus strictly on player phase. All right, and drum roll, please. The actual most interesting, in my opinion, investment for Earth, which is going to be Legendary Seliph. Now, this one was a little bit harder to think about because I felt like Seliph gets memed on. Like he's like, oh, he's hopeless. He gets screwed over by no follow-up against a lot of units. He's not as strong as his dad. Whatever the case might be, I honestly feel like Seliph is a standard mid-tier option here, and the reason for that is maybe you just got to think outside the box on how to best use them, and I think I can give you guys a solid idea here if you are a Seliph investor or thinking about investing into Seliph in the long term. Now, the thing that makes Seliph unique is he's basically only enemy phase, basically only. That's that's the downfall of Seliph. He's strictly enemy phase and hard to use on player phase. He has a great attack stat. He has a pretty decent weapon actually, basically giving him healing and reducing enemy like attack and defense and such. So that's like the thing that gets going for him. But of course, his preference skill is completely unique to him in the game, which is an enemy phase desperation. And of course, that is countered by null follow-up. But here's where things get interesting. I'm going to show you just one build that I think you may want to consider if you're a Seliph user. And that's strictly trying to stack his speed as much as possible. Now, this may look like a hopeless endeavor because 28 speed at max investment looks like a meme. But it can be done. I don't think you can match like Claude, probably not. But if you can actually get his speed up to a level where he is potentially competing with all these null follow-up units, then he can double back without relying on the auto double of his B skill. Meaning he's just going to naturally outspeed, but he still gets that the enemy phase desperation here, which is really good. An added benefit of a speedy legendary Seliph is he now officially can have a player phase. He can actually potentially double the enemy, and on top of that, it can help his bulk as well because he's an enemy phase unit. So you can potentially stop the enemy from doubling him, which could kill him. So I think this is about, like, it's probably not unique, I'm sure it's already been done, but I think the right way of using Seliph, and I've used him a bit, especially during his bonus season, I don't actually think he's a bad unit, not by any means. I just think he's harder to use or slightly different in terms of investment than your traditional Earth Legendary here. And he can generally be your best unit if you have the right enemy team to run into, or you just have the right support. Like I said, stacking his speed, running stuff like joint drive speed or just other units with joint drive speed and just drive speed in the seal, for example, ally support, summoner support, you can stack his speed into the 40s and 50s and maybe even higher if you're really, really determined. You're running like a chill speed on your team as well, hitting the panic, he can get there. And that is, in my opinion, the best way to use Seliph. So hopefully that might have inspired some of you to not auto-dismiss him as an Earth Legendary, because I think he's actually pretty good. Definitely better than Tiki, who's basically screwed in this season until she gets her refines, and even then I don't really see what they're going to do. But yeah, that basically covers the Earth Legendaries, folks. And I feel this video is definitely a bit longer because they're mostly dated. Like, most of the Earth Legendaries are older than like Claude. Claude was easy to cover here, and if the rest of them were easy to cover, then this video wouldn't be as long. But if you did make it all this way here, then hopefully I got you thinking about where you're going to put into your Earth Legendary considerations. I'm a +10 Tiki user, and I'm speaking from strictly experience here that the scoring does not outweigh the actual unviability of that unit, and would not consider her even if she scores well. However, I am investing into a +10 Julia, and I'm looking forward to that because I do like Julia and I do like the uniqueness of her character. I mean, like, as a combat unit as well. So that should be fun and hopefully in January for me. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you made it this far, as always, thumbs up, sub if you haven't already. Let me know in the comments below what you think or details I might have missed. I'm sure you'll be saying why are you using Mystic Boost on something like Julia, but hey, maybe the healing is good, who knows. Yeah, thanks guys. See you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.